Madam, something terrible has happened. Modupe felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What they saw there sent chills down their spines. But before he could pull her away, the wall cracked open and something began to emerge from within. Bisola was born into a life of luxury that only few could dream of. Her parents, Sheyi and Modupe Ajibade, were among the wealthiest in the city. Sheyi was a successful businessman who had built an empire from scratch, while Modupe was a well-known philanthropist who was loved and admired for her generosity. The Ajibades lived in an expensive mansion, complete with sprawling gardens and every imaginable comfort money could buy. From the moment Bisola was born, she was showered with love and affection by her parents, who adored her more than anything in the world. Bisola's life was filled with laughter, joy, and endless playtime. Her parents ensured that she never lacked anything. She had the most exquisite clothes, the finest toys, and the most extravagant birthday parties that any child could wish for. Yet, among all the gifts and treasures, there was one thing that stood out as Bisola's favorite: her teddy bears. Modupe had a soft spot for stuffed animals and passed this love on to her daughter. Bisola's room was like a mini zoo, filled with all sorts of plush animals, but the teddy bears were special. Bisola loved them dearly, and her parents made sure to buy her the best and most unique teddy bears from around the world. Some were made of the softest cashmere, others were adorned with jewels, and a few were even custom made just for her. But among them, there was one teddy bear that became Bisola's constant companion. It was a large brown teddy bear with bright glassy eyes and a silky ribbon tied around its neck. It was the last gift Bisola received on her 5th birthday, and from the moment she saw it, she was smitten. "Mommy, look at him. He's perfect," Bisola exclaimed as she hugged the teddy bear tightly. Modupe smiled at her daughter's excitement. "Do you like him, my darling?" Modupe asked. "I love him," Bisola replied with a wide smile. "I'm going to name him Mr. Fluffles." And so, Mr. Fluffles became Bisola's most cherished toy. She took him everywhere, to the garden, to the park, to the dining table, even to bed at night. Modupe and Sheyi were delighted to see their daughter so happy and didn't think twice about the unusual attachment she had formed with the teddy bear. But there was something about Mr. Fluffles that Modupe couldn't quite put her finger on. Sometimes, when she walked past Bisola's room at night, she felt a strange chill in the air, as though something wasn't right. She dismissed it as her imagination and continued with her life, never suspecting that her daughter's beloved teddy bear was anything but a harmless toy. At first, Mr. Fluffles seemed like any other teddy bear. He was soft, cuddly, and comforting to little Bisola. She would talk to him, tell him all her secrets, and even have tea parties with him. Bisola's parents thought it was adorable and encouraged her imaginative play. But soon, things began to change. It started with small, barely noticeable incidents. Bisola, who was always a cheerful and polite child, began to have sudden outbursts of anger. She would throw tantrums for no apparent reason, something that was entirely out of character for her. At night, she would wake up screaming, claiming that she had terrible nightmares. "Bisola, what's wrong?" Modupe would ask, rushing to her daughter's side. "I had a bad dream, Mommy," Bisola would say, her voice trembling. "But Mr. Fluffles told me it would be okay." Modupe would comfort her daughter and reassure her that everything was fine. But the nightmares persisted, and with them, Bisola's behavior grew increasingly strange. She began to talk to Mr. Fluffles as if he were a real person, having long conversations with him in hushed tones. Sometimes, Modupe would overhear snippets of these conversations, and they sent shivers down her spine. "Mr. Fluffles says we are going to be best friends forever," Bisola would say, her voice eerily calm. "He says he will always take care of me, even when I'm scared." Modupe tried to dismiss her unease. After all, Bisola was just a child with an active imagination. It wasn't uncommon for children to have imaginary friends, and Mr. Fluffles was just a teddy bear. But deep down, Modupe couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then, strange things began happening in the house. Lights would flicker on and off, without explanation. Doors would creak open on their own, and objects would move from their places as if they had a life of their own. The staff in the mansion started whispering about the house being haunted, but Shay and Modupe didn't believe in such things. They blamed faulty wiring, the wind, or the overactive imaginations of their employees. But Bisola knew better. She knew that Mr. Fluffles was behind it all. He would whisper things to her in the dead of night, filling her mind with dark thoughts and terrible ideas. He told her that her parents didn't really love her. They were going to send her away, and that the only one she could trust was him. "Don't worry, Bisola," Mr. Fluffles would say in a voice that only she could hear. "I'll protect you. I'll make sure no one ever hurts you." Bisola believed him. She started to withdraw from everyone around her, spending more and more time alone with Mr. Fluffles. She stopped playing with her other toys, stopped talking to her friends, and even started ignoring her parents. Shay and Modupe were at a loss. They didn't know what had happened to their sweet little girl, and they were growing increasingly concerned. One night, as Modupe tucked Bisola into bed, she noticed something strange. Mr. Fluffles was sitting on the bed, his glassy eyes staring directly at her. For a moment, Modupe could have sworn that the bird's expression had changed, that it looked more menacing, more alive. She shook her head, trying to rid herself of the unsettling thought. "Good night, sweetheart," Modupe said, kissing Bisola on the forehead. "Good night, mommy," Bisola replied, hugging Mr. Fluffles tightly. As Modupe turned to leave the room, she heard a faint whisper. It was so soft that she almost didn't catch it, but it was there. It sounded like a voice, but not Bisola's. It was deeper, more sinister. "Good night, mommy," the voice said mockingly. Modupe froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned back to look at Bisola, but her daughter was already fast asleep, clutching Mr. Fluffles. Modupe tried to convince herself that she had imagined it, that it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew that something was very, very wrong. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the Ajibade mansion grew increasingly tense. Bisola's behavior continued to deteriorate, and the strange occurrences around the house became more frequent and more disturbing. One morning, the family's housekeeper, Mrs. Folade, came rushing into the kitchen with a look of sheer terror on her face. "Madam, something terrible has happened," she exclaimed, her hands shaking as she clutched a dishcloth. "What is it, Mrs. Folade?" Modupe asked, her own anxiety growing. "It's the greenhouse, madam. The plants. They're all dead. And there's something written on the glass. Something awful." Modupe and Sheyi exchanged worried glances before rushing to the greenhouse at the back of the mansion. What they saw there sent chills down their spines. The once vibrant and lush plants were now withered and blackened, as if some unseen force had drained the life out of them. But what was even more disturbing was the message scrawled across the glass walls in what looked like a black suit. "He is mine." Modupe felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This wasn't just a prank or an accident. It was something far more sinister. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Sheyi said, his voice shaking slightly. "This has gone on long enough." That night, Sheyi and Modupe sat down with Bisola, determined to find out what was going on. "Bisola's sweetheart," Modupe began gently, "we need to talk to you about something important. We are worried about you." Bisola looked up from Mr. Fluffles, her expression black. "Why are you worried, mommy?" "Well," Sheyi interjected, "we've noticed that you've been acting differently lately, and there have been some strange things happening in the house. We just want to make sure you're okay." Bisola's eyes narrowed slightly as she hugged Mr. Fluffles closer to her chest. "I'm fine, Daddy. Mr. Fluffles takes care of me. He tells me what to do." Modupe's heart sank. "What do you mean, my darling? Mr. Fluffles is just a teddy bear. He can't talk." "He does talk, mommy," Bisola insisted, her voice rising. "He tells me everything. He told me that you don't love me anymore, that you're going to send me away. But I don't care, because I have him. I don't need you." Tears welled up in Modupe's eyes. as she reached out to her daughter. Bisola, that's not true. We love you more than anything in the world. We would never send you away. But Bisola shook her head furiously, clutching Mr. Fluffles so tightly. No, Mr. Fluffles says you're lying. He says you're bad people and that you want to hurt me. Modupe felt a lump in her throat, and Sheyi was at a loss for words. They had never seen their daughter so angry, so frightened. It was as if the sweet little girl they had known had been replaced by someone else entirely. Bisola, honey, Sheyi said softly, trying to calm her down. Mr. Fluffles is just a toy. He can't hurt you or tell you things. We are your parents, and we love you. You have to trust us. But Bisola only hugged the bear tighter and turned away from there. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Leave me alone. Sheyi and Modupe exchanged helpless looks before reluctantly leaving the room. As they closed the door behind them, they couldn't help but feel that they had lost their daughter to something far beyond their understanding. That night, Modupe lay in bed, wide awake, her mind racing with worry. Sheyi was beside her, staring blankly at the ceiling. They had discussed calling a psychologist, or perhaps a priest, but they were afraid of what might happen if they took Mr. Fluffles away from Bisola. The bear had an unnatural hold over their daughter, and they feared what Bisola might do if they tried to separate them. Just as Modupe was about to drift to sleep, she heard a noise that made her blood run cold. It was a faint scratching sound, like nails on a chalkboard, coming from Bisola's room. She sat up in bed, straining to hear it again. Sheyi, did you hear that? She whispered urgently, shaking him awake. Sheyi rubbed his eyes and listened. There it was again, a slow, deliberate scratching that seemed to be coming from inside the walls. Stay here, Sheyi whispered back as he jumped out of bed. I'll go check on Bisola. Modupe watched anxiously as her husband grabbed a flashlight and made his way down the hall to their daughter's room. The door was slightly ajar, and Sheyi hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. What he saw nearly made his heart stop. Bisola was standing in the middle of her room, staring at the wall with wide, unblinking eyes. Mr. Fluffles was lying on the floor at her feet, his once bright eyes now dark and hollow. The scratching sound was louder now, coming from directly behind the wall that Bisola was fixated on. Bisola, Sheyi called out softly, but his daughter didn't respond. He approached her cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. When he reached out to touch her shoulder, Bisola suddenly whipped around, her face twisted in an expression of pure terror. Get away from me, she screamed, backing away from him. He's coming for you. She was about to reach for her when the wall behind her began to bulge, as if something was trying to push its way through. The scratching grew louder and more frantic, and Sheyi could feel the hairs on the back of his neck. Bisola, we need to get out of here, he shouted, grabbing her arm. But before he could pull her away, the wall cracked open and something began to emerge from within. It was a dark, shadowy figure, barely discernible in the dim light, but its presence was overwhelming. The air grew thick with a suffocating sense of dread, and Sheyi felt as if he were being crushed under his weight. Bisola's screams echoed through the room as the figure extended a long skeletal hand towards her. Sheyi acted on pure instinct, scooping his daughter into his arms and rushing out of the room. The figure let out a guttural roar that shook the very foundation of the house as it lunged after them. But Sheyi managed to slam the door shut just in time. Modupe, we need to get out of the house now, Sheyi yelled as he ran down the hallway. Bisola still clutched tightly in his arms. Modupe was already out of bed, her face pale with fear. Without asking questions, she grabbed her coat and purse, and three of them fled the mansion, leaving behind the echoes of that terrible roar. The Ajibades didn't stop running until they reached the car parked in the driveway. Sheyi fumbled with his keys, his hands trembling as he tried to unlock the doors. Modupe was holding Bisola close as she tried to calm the hysterical child. It's okay, my darling. We are going to be okay, Modupe whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Finally, Sheyi managed to unlock the car, and they all piled in. As they sped away from the mansion, Sheyi looked in the rear view mirror, half expecting to see that shadowy figure chasing after them. But there was nothing, just the dark, four-bodied silhouette of their home. They drove in silence for a while, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Eventually, they pulled into a hotel parking lot. Sheyi turned off the engine and let out a long, shaky breath. "What the hell just happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Modupe replied, her voice quivering. But whatever it wasn't natural. Sheyi nodded, his mind racing with questions. "We need to figure out what's going on. We can't go back there until we know how to stop this thing." "Maybe we should call Father Andrew," Modupe suggested. "He's dealt with things like this before, hasn't he?" Sheyi hesitated. Father Andrew was an old friend of the family, a priest who had been involved in several exorcisms and paranormal investigations. Sheyi had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, but after what they had just experienced, he was willing to try anything. "All right," Sheyi agreed. "We'll call him in the morning. But for now, let's just try to get some rest." They checked into the hotel under a false name, not wanting to draw any attention to themselves. Bisola was exhausted, her earlier hysteria giving way to a deep troubled sleep. As she lay in bed, Modupe sat beside her, stroking her hair and whispering soothing words. But even as Bisola slept, she clutched Mr. Fluffles tightly in her arms, as if the bear was the only thing keeping her safe. Sheyi and Modupe didn't sleep much that night. Every creak and groan of the hotel made them jump, their minds racing with thoughts of the entity that had invaded their home. They knew they couldn't stay away forever, but the thoughts of returning to that house filled them with dread. The next morning, Sheyi made a call to Father Andrew. The priest listened patiently as Sheyi recounted the events of the previous night, his voice shaking with fear and uncertainty. "This sounds serious, Sheyi," Father Andrew said gravely. "It's possible that you were dealing with a malevolent spirit, something that attached itself to your daughter through that teddy bear. What do we do?" Sheyi asked, with obvious desperation in his voice. "I'll come to the house this evening," Father Andrew replied. "In the meantime, keep Bisola close to you and try not to leave her alone with that teddy bear. Whatever you do, don't destroy it. If the spirit is truly attached to the teddy bear, destroying it could release it into your home, or worse, into Bisola." Sheyi felt a chill run down his spine at the thought. "All right, we will be careful." That evening, they returned to the mansion, their fear tempered by the hope that Father Andrew could help them. The house was eerily quiet as they entered, the usual warmth and comfort replaced by an oppressive, malevolent atmosphere. Father Andrew arrived shortly after. He was a tall, imposing figure, dressed in his traditional clerical garb, his face set in a grim expression. He carried a small black case containing the tools of his trade, holy water, a crucifix, a Bible, and various other items used in exorcisms. "Thank you for coming, Father," Modupe said, her voice trembling. "Of course," Father Andrew replied, giving her a reassuring nod. "Let's get started. Where is the teddy bear now?" "Bisola's room," Sheyi answered. "She wouldn't let us take it from her." Father Andrew nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll need to see her and the bear. You both stay close, but let me do the talking." They led Father Andrew upstairs to Bisola's room. The door was slightly ajar, and they could hear Bisola talking softly to Mr. Fluffles inside. Modupe felt her heart ache at the sound. Her daughter's voice was so small, so full of fear. Father Andrew pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. Bisola was sitting on the floor, cradling Mr. Fluffles in her arms, her eyes wide and unblinking as she stared at the priest. "Hello, Bisola," Father Andrew said softly, kneeling down to her level. "My name is Father Andrew. I'm here to help you." Bisola didn't respond, her gaze flickering nervously between the priest and the bear. "Bisola," Father Andrew continued, "I need you to tell me about Mr. Fluffles. What has he been saying to you?" At the mention of the bear's name, Bisola's grip on Mr. Fluffles tightened. He says he's going to protect me. He says you're here to take him away, but I won't let you. I need him." Father Andrew's eyes softened, understanding the hold this spirit had taken over the innocent child. He spoke calmly. Bisola, I promise, no one is going to take Mr. Fluffles away, but I do need to talk to him. Can you let me hold him, just for a moment? Bisola hesitated, glancing down at the teddy bear. Its glassy eyes seemed to glint with something dark and alive, as though it were listening, waiting. For a moment, it looked as if Bisola might refuse. But then, as if compelled by some unseen force, she slowly extended the bear towards Father Andrew, her small hands trembling. Father Andrew carefully took the bear, holding it at arm's length. The moment it left Bisola's hand, she let out a small gasp, her eyes filling with tears. Modupe quickly moved to her daughter's side, pulling her into a comforting embrace. It's okay, sweetheart. It's going to be okay, Modupe whispered, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Father Andrew set the bear down on the floor, in the center of the room, and began to prepare for the ritual. He sprinkled holy water over the bear, reciting prayers in Latin, his voice strong and unwavering. But as he did, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The air grew colder, and the lights flickered ominously. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, stretching out towards them like dark, grasping hands. Suddenly, the bear's glassy eyes glowed red, and a low guttural growl filled the room. Bisola screamed and clung to her mother as the teddy bear began to twitch and convulse, its limbs moving in unnatural, jerky motions. The growl grew louder, filling the room with a sound that was almost unbearable, a mix of anger, pain, and pure unfiltered malevolence. Modupe and Shei watched in horror as the bear began to rise, as if lifted by invisible strings. It hovered above the ground, its head twisting at an impossible angle to face Father Andrew. The priest held up his crucifix, his voice firm, as he commanded the spirit to reveal itself. By the power of Christ, I command you to leave this child and show yourself. The bear's mouth opened, and from it came a voice that was not its own, a deep, raspy voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth. She is mine, the voice snarled, full of rage. You cannot take her from me. Father Andrew stood his ground, unwavering. This child is under God's protection, and you have no power here. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I cast you out. The bear let out an ear-piercing scream, a sound so horrifying that it seemed to shake the walls of the room. Bisola cried out in pain, clutching her head, as if the sound was tearing through her mind. Modupe held her daughter tightly, whispering words of comfort, though tears streamed down her face. As Father Andrew continued the exorcism, the bear began to thrash violently, its fur scorching as though it were burning from the inside out. The room was filled with the smell of sulfur and smoke as the spirit fought against the priest's prayers. The crucifix in Father Andrew's hand seemed to glow with a holy light, and the bear recoiled, as if in agony. Finally, with one last agonized scream, the bear exploded into a cloud of dark, acrid smoke. The force of the blast knocked off Father Andrew to the ground, and the room was plunged into silence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the air suddenly felt lighter, cleaner. Modupe looked around, her breath catching in her throat, as she saw the charred remains of Mr. Fluffles lying on the floor. The teddy bear was nothing more than a smoldering pile of fabric and stuffing. It was over. For several moments, no one moved. The tension in the room was palpable, as they all tried to process what had just happened. Then, slowly, Bisola began to stare in Modupe's arms. She opened her eyes, blinking up at her mother in confusion. "Mommy," Bisola's voice was small, trembling. "What happened?" Modupe felt tears of relief spill over as she hugged her daughter tightly. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. Everything is going to be okay." Father Andrew slowly got to his feet, brushing off his robes. He was pale and visibly shaken, but he managed a small smile as he looked at the family. "It's over. The spirit is gone." Shei let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He moved to Modupe and Bisola, wrapping his arms around both of them in a protective embrace. Thank you, Father. I don't know how we can ever repay you. Father Andrew shook his head. There's no need for thanks. I'm just glad I was able to help. But I must warn you, what happened here was no ordinary haunting. That spirit was old, powerful. It must have been attached to that bear for a long time, waiting for the right person to latch onto. Modupe shuddered at the thought. But why Bisola? Why our daughter? The priest sighed. Sometimes, spirits are drawn to the innocence of children. They see them as easy targets, vessels they can manipulate and corrupt. Bisola must have been especially vulnerable for some reason, perhaps due to her attachment to that bear. Is she going to be okay? Sheyi asked, his voice thick with worry. Father Andrew nodded. She should be fine now, but it's important that you keep an eye on her. Make sure she knows she's loved and safe. And be careful with the things you bring into your home. Not every object is as harmless as it seems. The Ajibades spent the rest of the evening tending to Bisola and trying to reassure her that the nightmare was over. They were cautious not to speak too much about what had happened, fearing it might upset her further. Instead, they focused on comforting her and restoring a sense of normalcy. But despite their efforts, Bisola was never quite the same after that night. The once cheerful, outgoing child became quieter, more withdrawn. She would often stare up into space, as if lost in thought, and she refused to play with stuffed animals of any kind. The mere sight of a teddy bear sent her into a panic, and she would cry and beg her parents to take it away. Sheyi and Modupe did their best to support her, showering her with love and affection, but they could see the toll that the experience had taken on her. They decided to sell the mansion and move to a smaller, cozier house in the countryside, hoping that a change of environment would help Bisola heal. The new house was far from the grand estate they had left behind, but it was warm, inviting, and most importantly, free of any lingering darkness. The family gradually settled into their new life, focusing on rebuilding a sense of security for Bisola. They enrolled her in a small, friendly school where the teachers were understanding and kind. Bisola slowly started to make new friends, though she remained cautious and reserved. She no longer had nightmares, and the dark circles under her eyes began to fade. Over time, the memories of that terrifying experience began to blur, though they never completely disappeared. Modupe and Sheyi remained vigilant, careful to protect their daughter from anything that might remind her of Mr. Fluffles or the events that had transpired. They even went so far as to avoid toy stores, fearing that even a casual glance at a teddy bear might trigger something in Bisola. They became more selective about the toys and objects they allowed into their home, mindful of the lesson they had learned. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you will enjoy this one. It's about a girl who sacrificed her life to come back as a ghost and take revenge on the people who killed her triplet sisters. Thank you for watching.